Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The UK's financial watchdog has opened an investigation into the collapsed finance firm Greensill Capital. Its founder, the Australian banker Lex Greensill, has been appearing before MPs speaking publicly for the first time about what happened. He says he takes complete responsibility and insists there has been no loss to the British taxpayer. It comes as the Treasury Committee published texts from David Cameron revealing the extent of his lobbying for the firm. Our business editor, Simon Jack, is with me, and there were a lot of texts, more than 40 of them.
Yeah, what's revealed, Sophie, is a very intense bout of lobbying over a period last year from March, April and May on behalf of his then new employer, Greensill Capital. And it's a who's who of Treasury ministers and civil servants. John Glenn, Economic Secretary to the Treasury. Hi, John. David Cameron here. Could I have a quick word? There's a problem with SME, small business lending, and the Treasury, and I know you can fix it. And that I know you can fix. Thanks so much. Call this number any time. And then to the Chancellor himself, first thing would be fine, Rishi. I can imagine how busy you must be. You're doing a great job. Keep going. And then to Michael Gove, speaking to Rishi first thing tomorrow. If I'm still stuck, can I call you then? Now, that was the David Cameron text, and he's going to be appearing on Thursday. We then heard part two was Lex Greensill appearing, and he was explaining how and why his business went bust with a threat to Sanjeev Gupta's steel empire and 5,000 jobs. He arrived with an apology, but he had to face some tough questions about the honesty and integrity of his business. One MP saying, "Are you a fraudster?" To which he replied, "No." He did not answer direct questions about his relationship with Sanjeev Gupta, saying the FCA, the financial watchdog, had opened an investigation into that relationship, which could have a potentially criminal dimension. But as I say, David Cameron and some of these lobbying questions will be put to him on Thursday.
Simon Jack, thank you.
Now, the scale of David Cameron's lobbying efforts on behalf of the finance company Greensill were laid bare today, revealing the former Prime Minister sent 62 texts and 11 emails to ministers and officials, including Michael Gove and the Chancellor. Lex Greensill himself was questioned by MPs for the first time since his company collapsed in March, defending suggestions that his multi-billion-pound business was ever viable. Our economics correspondent Helia Ebrahimi reports.
My name is Lex Greensill. Please understand that I bear complete responsibility for the collapse of Greensill Capital.
In his first public appearance since the collapse of his company, the Australian financier appeared before Parliament, at first apologising, but then quickly pivoting to blame his insurance company, the German regulator, his clients and even the pandemic. But MPs had a different take.
Mr. Greensill, are you a fraudster?
No, Ms McDonough, I am not.
As a layperson, it seems to me that this is precisely what your financial model of prospective receivables is. Nothing more than a trick.
You've apologised for the 1,000 jobs lost in your own company and others related. I think you owe it to the British people to answer the question, Mr. Greensill.
Lex Greensill built a web of contacts, including the former Prime Minister David Cameron, who he hired as an advisor. His links with Jeremy Hayward, then the country's top civil servant, opened the doors of Whitehall. Bill Crothers, the government's chief procurement officer, took a job at Greensill while he was still in government. And all the while, Greensill was bankrolling this man, Sanjeev Gupta, whose Liberty Steel empire employs thousands of Brits, whose jobs now hang in the balance. It's that relationship that has sparked concern amongst regulators and insurers alike. Greensill funneled $5 billion of debt to Gupta's GFG alliance, supposedly secured on customer invoices. But do those invoices even exist? That's a question regulators are asking, and so were MPs.
But the German regulator has clearly raised concerns about your dependence on that particular client.
And more correctly, their dependence on us.
Yes, absolutely. Mutual
But
interdependence.
We did have a concentration on certain customers that was too high.
From the German regulator, which says that you were unable to provide evidence of the existence of receivables in your balance sheet that you had purchased from GFG Alliance Group.
We booked assets that were real assets. They were booked according to the advice and direction that we had from our auditors and from our legal advisors, but at no time was there a position where the assets didn't exist.
Can I make the point, in light of that, that there is not transparency here in your business model? The whole concept of future receivables is, in effect, a loan, unsecured lending, but it is being dressed up as supply chain finance.
That didn't stop Greensill getting to the very heart of the British establishment, with Cameron boasting that it was the world's leading supply chain finance firm with a UK government mandate. Greensill managed to get business from the NHS through David Cameron, who set up drinks with the Health Secretary Matt Hancock. He wanted to access taxpayer-backed loans during the pandemic. David Cameron went to Tom Scholar from the Treasury. He went to Rishi Sunak. He went to the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. And today, we learned, he also went to Michael Gove. Back in Parliament, the salesman Lex Greensill was working overtime. Despite 3 hours of back-to-back questions, Greensill was rarely ruffled, cracking smiles and flattering MPs while schooling them on his version of financial innovation. Well, today it also came out that the financial regulator in the UK is now investigating Greensill formally. That's rather interesting given Cameron's evidence to the committee, where he claims he had no clue of any problems until December last year. It's a rather different picture from the evidence submitted by the Bank of England and the regulator, who pointed to issues dating back to March 2020. And that's a key date, because it's when Cameron launches his lobbying assault. And what an assault it was. We learned today that he sent an astonishing 62 texts and 11 emails to ministers, officials and the Bank of England. In one, he tells the Treasury Mandarin, "I'm riding to the rescue with supply chain finance," adding in a chummy tone, "See with Rishi for an elbow bump or a foot tap. Love DC." These disclosures also reveal what Cameron texted Rishi Sunak. Leaning on the Chancellor, he declares that Treasury's refusal to offer taxpayer support to Greensill was nuts. And in another message, he calls it bonkers, threatening he would now call the Chancellor, Gove and everyone. This obviously, Kathy, adds to the concerns about lobbying by politicians.
It certainly does. Helia, thanks very much.
Now, there were blunt and hostile questions, frank admissions of responsibility and awkward exchanges over lobbying and who to blame. Lex Greensill faced questions from MPs on the Treasury Select Committee over the collapse of his supply chain finance firm Greensill Capital and lobbying by its advisor, David Cameron. Well, we know that the Financial Conduct Authority is investigating possible criminal conduct, and we saw more of the dozens of text messages that the former Prime Minister sent to officials and the likes of Michael Gove and Rishi Sunak. The session began with exchanges over accusations from the former City Minister, Lord Miners, that the company was a Ponzi scheme.
He told us that when he left the meeting, when he'd gone down in the lift afterwards and he was thinking about it, into his mind came the idea that what was going on here was, and I am paraphrasing him, tantamount to a Ponzi scheme, as he described it. Could you just tell the committee a little bit about that meeting?
I was very surprised to hear the evidence that Lord Miners provided to this committee 2 weeks ago. And it is not consistent with my recollection of the events.
Well, joining me now is the former City Minister, Lord Miners. Lord Miners, very good morning to you. I mean, you put the boot into Mr Greensill on a number of occasions, but he read out emails yesterday suggesting you were in talks to become a director of his company.
He's tried this before. It's known in football terms as tackling the man rather than the ball, selective quotations. What was very clear to me was it was a polished presentation by Lex until you realised that he was reading the answers, or appeared to be, off a device that was flipping them up onto the screen in front of him. That led to him being quite confused about dates and numbers and various other things, because they often put the wrong answer up for him to read out. Specifically, he said that I arranged the meeting with him, the only meeting I ever had. In fact, I've got emails, Ian, from Lex Greensill's office saying that he wanted to see me. And I've got a number of other pieces of paper which I would disclose to the committee if the committee wanted. I think what was really
saying then that you weren't in talks to become a director?
No, he made. I was very clear, Ian. This is old history. At the end of the meeting, he said, "Why don't you become a director?" And I said, "I wasn't here for that purpose. I was already fully committed. I was here to better understand how his business operated." He carried on talking about that. I used it as a way of staying in contact with him and his chairman to try to learn more information, because, as I said in Parliament, I had very real doubts about what was going on here. And I have to say, after listening yesterday, I have even more doubts. Lex had often gave inconsistent answers. He had to be corrected on things by the committee, where he said things about clients, and it was then shown by the committee that he was wrong, and he said, oh, he'd forgotten that. He got dates confused, he got numbers confused, he got definitions confused. I thought it was a pretty poor showing, and provides a good frame, nevertheless, for David Cameron on Thursday when he gives evidence, because prima facie, Lex Greensill said that David Cameron was a shadow director. And under Section 2511 of the Companies Act, that gives David Cameron quite a lot of liabilities as far as what went on at Greensill Capital.
OK, we'll get on to David Cameron in a moment. I just want to be clear from you, though. Are you saying that Lex Greensill was being disingenuous yesterday with the committee?
I think that's probably quite a good word to use. The supply chain finance is quite complicated, but he claims to have invented this, Ian. Supply chain finance under the name of factoring and trade finance has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. He didn't invent anything new. He talked about how he'd used AI, but when asked to give an example, he said that he was able to forecast 2 months ahead what drugs a pharmacy would be required to give to patients. That's not AI, that's simple extrapolation and based on seasonal patterns. There was an awful lot of hogwash and trying to pull wool over the committee's eyes. I think the committee will go back to him with a lot of supplementary questions and say, look, these answers were not consistent. At one point, he said no money would be lost as a result of the failure of Greensill Capital. That's absolutely preposterous. Very substantial amounts of money and damage will be done to the economy by the collapse of Greensill Capital.
Are you actually saying he lied to the committee then, Lord Miners?
I'm saying that he gave answers to the questions he wanted to be asked, or the answers that were on the screen in front of him, which were not necessarily for the question he was being asked. These are matters of opinion, but I don't think there's any doubt that the taxpayer and the economy will be badly hit by the collapse of Greensill Capital and possibly the Gupta Steel Group. So I think in areas of opinion, only time will tell. The court that he ultimately appears in, if he's charged, will be a legal court, so it's not the court of public opinion. But in my view, the evidence increasingly supports the contention that there was a structure in place here was not as robust as it was being presented.
But is there actual evidence at the moment that taxpayers have lost money? I mean, sure, we can speculate that the taxpayer may ultimately have to bail out Liberty Steel, but the taxpayer wasn't actually on the hook for anything done by Greensill directly, was it?
Oh, no. Are you sure about that? The Corona Business Interruption Scheme loans, £600 million. None of that will be paid by Greensill because there's no equity. That will all fall on the taxpayer, Ian. £365 million to support the Lochaber aluminium works in Scotland. Do you want me to continue the list, Ian? There are very, very specific cases of grants and loans and facilities that went through Greensill or Gupta where the taxpayer is likely to lose money.
What about David Cameron then? You mentioned him yesterday. What would be the first question you would ask him tomorrow? Were you on the committee?
I would say, Mr. Cameron, you've said you weren't on the Risk and Audit Committee, but Mr. Greensill said you attended meetings of the board. So did those committees report to the board? In which case, are you trying to suggest that you didn't know as much as you probably did? I would probably then ask him, was he aware the company was probably in great difficulties when he started lobbying the Chancellor and civil servants and other ministers? And then probably for a little bit of fun at the end, I would ask him about the various flights that he took to that well-known financial centre, Newquay in Cornwall, on Greensill planes, and asking him whether he paid for these flights himself and whether he declared them as income on his tax return. That's probably where I'd start in.
Very nice place, of course, Newquay. I mean, he could be forgiven for going there, couldn't he? What about...
30 miles, I'm in Cornwall now. It's 30 miles from where if Dave wants to be picked up at the airport, I'll go and find him.
That would be quite a meeting, wouldn't it? In terms of the exchanges, though, between Mr Cameron and the Bank of England, the Treasury, I mean, it looks like he was rebuffed at every turn. I mean, do you take comfort from that? The system appears to be working pretty well.
Yeah, I think the civil servants of the Bank of England come out of this very well. The British Business Bank is the one agency which doesn't come out well because they granted facilities to accreditation facilities to Greensill Bank. The Bank of England clearly had notice from the German regulator, BaFin, that things were wrong at Greensill Bank. That somehow doesn't seem to have filtered back into wider government knowledge. So on the one hand, you've got a government agency, the Bank of England, that knew Greensill had problems in its German bank. On the other hand, you've got the British Business Bank, which is part of the Department of Business, which is allowing Greensill to lend taxpayers money. So generally speaking, the public sector comes out of it well, but there are one or two areas where questions do need to be asked.
All right, Lord Miners, we have to leave it there. Good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.